Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have slipped under the radar and passed most people by. Today, we're going to be talking about a cult classic from 1984, The Toxic Avenger, a Troma staple. And the man who brought that to me is another podcaster, a great podcaster, Matt Kay of Cinema Jaw. How's it going, man?
It's going very well, and thank you for the compliment.
Oh yeah, happy to have you here. How you doing, by the way?
Yeah, dude, I'm doing pretty good. Things are rocking and rolling. Cinema Jaw is entering its 15th year,
Wow.
which is insane. Yeah, getting up closer to 700 episodes. I think it's like 650 something that we just posted. And I just joined the board of the Chicago Indie Critics as one of the directors. So
That's awesome.
busy times.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks,
very,
dude.
very
Yeah.
cool.
It was voted in. I should mention. So that always makes you feel good, you know.
That's really cool. You're like one of the OG film podcasts. I always feel like, people always are like, oh, I started the pandemic. I was like, well, I started way back in 2019, and it's like you've been doing it. Yeah, yeah, that's really awesome, man.
2009, yeah, crazy. It's a long time.
That is very cool. Going strong. So that's awesome. And congrats on the Film Critics Director. What you say, Chicago Film Critics Association?
Chicago Indie Critics.
Chicago Indie Critics. Thank you.
Yeah. We're like the redheaded stepchild to the Chicago Film Critics Association, but you take your pick. I think we're a little bit more of the underground.
That's cool. I've got a deep respect for indie films. I wrote for Film Threat for a while. Always try to go support the local indie theater here, the Frida. Speaking of indie films,
Yeah.
the movie we're talking about is, like we said, The Toxic Avenger, which was a kind of indie cult hit. It's sort of the house that Troma's built on. This is one that you suggested to me. It's one that I had not seen before. Surprisingly enough, I hadn't seen any Troma movies before, so I'm really glad I got to check this off the list. Why did you want to talk about this one here on Underrated?
Yeah, it's always weird when I talk to you. I'm always like, is something underrated? Is it not underrated? It's by whose metric is it underrated? I think that there's a big swath of cinephiles, and I'll tell a story that I tell on Cinema Jaw way too often, much to my co-host Rye the Movie Guy's chagrin. We were at C2E2, which we were just talking about before you hit record. It's basically Chicago's Comic-Con. And I was like, dude, there's Lloyd Kaufman. And Ryan, who is, I will admit, way more better versed in film than I am, he said, who? And that blew my mind. That here's a guy who is like Criterion Collection film aficionado, did not know who Lloyd Kaufman was. And I think that more light still yet needs to be shed upon Troma, which is a launchpad for so many great filmmakers and actors. And whether you love it or hate it, and a lot of people hate it, it's just not for everyone. There's no doubt about that. But it's undeniable that this is a sort of a proving ground for young talent in a lot of ways.
I mean, you have did James Gunn came out of the Troma school? Did he not?
So, yes, James Gunn, so many. So I don't know if you knew this tidbit, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on this. Marissa Tomei is in The Toxic Avenger.
I did. Where is she? I didn't even notice.
She blink and you miss it when Toxie attacks the blonde evil girl.
Mm-hmm.
Marissa Tomei comes out of the showers and screams. She's fully clothed, but she is in it. Yep. Crazy.
One of the few people fully clothed in this movie.
True. James Gunn, the South Park guys, so many. I mean, if you Google it, you'll see like a big list of people that came through.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm really glad that because like you said, I think that you brought up like how do we define underrated, and I've always kind of been very loose with it. Everybody kind of has their own definition. What's underrated to some people might not be underrated to other people. Like once again, what we were talking about cons before, and one of the people I was talking to at WonderCon was like, "You got to cover the Waterboy at some point. It's really underrated." I was like, "Everybody loves the Waterboy," so it's like one of those things. It's like yeah, is a cult classic, really underrated. And I think with this one, I hadn't seen it. I hadn't. So, but it's one of those movies I was aware of, but it feels very like a certain group of people really have a strong admiration for it, but it doesn't have mass appeal. So I would say that counts as underrated. So yeah, glad I got to finally check this one out. What do you think about the movie itself, though?
I have, as my tastes have changed and I've matured, my opinions and attitudes toward the content of the movie itself have shifted with the times. I think that's probably the best way I can put that. But I mean, dude, it's irreverent, it's fun, it's punk as all hell, and yeah. I think if you come at it in context of the film itself, it's really surprisingly well made 80s schlock movie. It's fantastic,
Yeah, and I'll just say, I'm looking at the reported budget for this movie, $500,000, which is nothing. It comes in at 82 minutes. It is really that 80s schlock. It's just like feels like what can we throw together on the day? Like, what props can we make? We've got the one Toxie suit, but we're just gonna. It's almost like Mad Max 1, where it's just like a bunch of psychopaths go and make a movie. It's got that same kind of feel, which I really appreciate, and it's we definitely need to. I try to, as much as I can, shine a light on indie films here on Underrated, because they deserve to be appreciated. This, Troma, like you said, was such a proving ground. It's almost like it's grosser, but like an A24 or like a Neon of its day, where it's just like it's smaller. It's giving a chance for these really creative people to kind of make their vision, but in a way that's a little bit more grimy and grungy and 80s slashers or
openly exploitative, I think is it like right on its face. I don't think it would shy away from being called that one whatsoever. Kaufman,
yeah, absolutely.
He's a genius, man. I mean, like, have you ever read his book?
I have not. I'm always looking for a good film book to read. I'm working my way through Tarantino's right now. What's his?
That'd be an interesting follow-up to Tarantino's book. I wonder how much they would like match up. It's called Make Your Own Damn Movie. And I would say anybody who doesn't want to wait for permission or a big budget or studio help to make a film, if you read this book, it's incredibly inspirational. Just like, especially with today's technology, you can just grab your phone and go out there and make a movie. It's a great book. I think he wrote it in the 90s, so it's a little outdated, but it translates.
That's cool. Did you ever read Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew?
No, I haven't. And you know what? Speaking of Comic-Cons, I saw him at Comic-Con slinging the book when it first came out, and I meant to go back and pick up the copy, but I never did. Is it good?
It's very good. It is a little bit like self-aggrandizing, but it's that same kind of thing you're talking about, of like, he's just a guy who went out and like made a movie in the early 90s, and just kind of, like you mentioned, it is kind of a little bit dated now, because he talks about basically him going to be part of this medical trial to like earn money to make the movie, and most of the money that he spent on the movie is just on film stock. So it's like would not even be an issue anymore, because like you said, you can just go on your phone or like a relatively inexpensive camera. One of the panels I was at WonderCon, they mentioned that, I mean, it's not like necessarily like entry-level affordable, but you could theoretically buy a camera at Best Buy that is literally the same camera that Gareth Edwards shot The Creator with, which blows my mind.
It's crazy. There's really, the barrier to entry to filmmaking has been lowered so much. It's just that the people think you need these hundreds of millions of dollars to make art, and the fact is you don't. And I think that's what's cool about Troma. I don't think you may, but you might not get a Robert Rodriguez without the Troma kind of paving the way in 1984. And this movie especially, man, I mean, there was a kid's Saturday morning cartoon made after the Toxic Avenger. Explain that one to me, man. It's it's a weird property that's had some interesting staying power.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where there's a remake that just got made. I don't think it's been distributed yet, but it made the festival circuits last year. So, and it's got obviously a much more impressive cast in the remake than it did the cell because it's taken on this bigger life. Like Elijah Wood and all these like bigger names are in, like Kevin Bacon, I think, who also ironically got his start in 80s schlock movies in the original Friday the 13th.
Yep.
But yeah, this one, the legacy of it is so big. Yet I think that it is a little bit looked down on as, like, I mean, it is like 80s schlock. It's this kind of cheap little movie, but it does have that power of, like, yeah, anybody can go make a movie. And I will say, I had a really fun time watching it too. It's not just like this, like, oh, relic of, like, let's just see what these guys were doing. That's crazy. It's still a pretty enjoyable movie. I will say there are parts of it, you got to go into it realizing this is a product of its time. It is on its face pretty, like, at times, like, homophobic and ableist and all these other things. But you got to kind of go in knowing that's what you're getting, and it's never I don't feel like mean-spirited. I feel like it's just a little bit like outdated.
It's definitely outdated, but I mean, I think the thing you'll realize if you see it is that it was made by a lot of people who were part of marginalized groups, marginalized subcultures, or just marginalized in general. I mean, like, here's a great example. The guy that, and I don't know if this is inclusion or exploitation. You take your pick. Tell me what you think, actually. Okay. The guy that gets his arm ripped off in the cafe scene when the robbers come in to shoot up the cafe. Toxic Avenger comes in and rips a guy's arm off. Well, that actor actually only has one arm. So that's how they pulled off that special effect. So there you have a less than 100% able-bodied person making this film. And a lot of the people in Troma were queer and all kinds of different walks of life. A lot of, like, punks and freaks and the kind of people that were looked down on back then, especially.
Yeah, so absolutely.
In some ways, it was like a safe haven for filmmakers. Definitely, and you can make this argument that it was exploitative at the same time. So it's a bit of a head scratcher. Like, I think people need to make up their own minds about it, and maybe that's why it's so looked down on.
No, that's fair. And, like, what you're saying, it just reminded me of the argument that always gets thrown out about Freaks. The early early black and white film, which is like, oh yeah, like, people are always like, well, this is exploitative. They used all these actors, blah, blah, blah. They just escaped. But then, you listen to the people who are in that movie, a lot of people from that community, they're like, yeah, they were given work. Like, they wouldn't have had, work. They were part of a community. Like you said, it was something like, oh, well, like, this movie not get made today, but then these guys wouldn't be in it. They wouldn't be able to show off their talents. And I think it's really cool that, that the guy who had the one arm was cast in that role, because today you would probably just do it with CG or like an expensive prosthetic or something like that. So I think that's really rad that they were able to do that, and that also speaks to, like, just the down and dirtiness of this movie. The fact that they were like, we're gonna make this movie, and it like, the effects, you can, like, see that there are, like, effects that they're kind of cheesy, but I think they hold up, and they hold up a lot better than something from, like, the early 2000s. Like, if you look at, like,
there's one effect. We got to talk about one effect, but go on.
But I say, like, put this next to something like, I don't know, like, The Hobbit, or like where they put the GoPros on and there's, like, everything was kind of shiny, or like the Scorpion King. You have The Rock and he's like he looks like he's like a PlayStation 1 graphic. That ages a lot better or a lot worse than a lot of the stuff in this movie, which it's real, so you can kind of tell. You're like, okay, there's this viscerality to it. It's kind of like movie magic a little bit. But what's the effect you want to talk about? Let's dive into that.
I mean, it's the second only to the great head bursting scene in the movie Scanners. Is the head bursting scene here in the Toxic Avenger. These sort of like punk / jock teenagers who are, God knows, strung out on God knows what and drinking. They roll around in their car committing vehicular homicide, right? And they look for the most innocent people to murder in this way. Oh, yeah. And they find this kid on a bicycle, and it's disgusting and kind of hilarious at the same time. But they hit this kid, and then they back up and crush his head. And listen, if you're into gore or just cool special effects, this is a great special effect. It really looks disgusting. It totally holds up to this day.
It looks incredible, and that's the benefit you will have. Like, I'm not a person who like hates CG by any means. I think it's a tool like any other tool. But when it becomes like the only thing, and you lose the great practical effects like this, like that effect really holds up. Like I remember, I think I shouted "Holy shit" when I saw that scene because A, like it looks so good, but B, it kind of tells you what movie you're in for. Because a lot of movies, it's like you watch a movie and you're like, well, the kids have plot armor. They're going to be safe. And this movie, it's like, it tells you kind of like pretty quickly off the bat what kind of villains you're dealing with and what kind of movie this is. It's like, no, nobody's safe. Like, this is a movie that is not afraid to like be like, oh, the precious little child, everyone around him's getting murdered, but they're okay. But yeah, this movie's just like, no, everyone's in danger. This is a gross, down and dirty movie. Don't feel safe ever.
Yeah. You know what I was thinking about? It's like going back a topic in a way that this movie isn't like it's misanthropic. It's not against any one specific type of person. It's against humans. Because the hero, the Toxic Avenger, he's a mutant, right? He's not human anymore. They call him a monster. They're like, no, he's not. He's like an it. So I don't know. I think that's fun to explore in a movie like this, where it's irreverent and obviously not taking itself very seriously.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That it's not really singling any particular groups out or anything. It's not like I said, it doesn't feel mean spirited. It just feels like it's a down and dirty movie. These just some random dudes were making in the 80s. And it's like, yeah, they're just taking shots at everyone. It's like, yeah, these people in it are awful. They're manipulative. And I like that, like you said, like I mentioned that it's not afraid to kill kids. This is a movie, one thing that I think is kind of annoys me in a lot of movies is when they feel like, oh, well, they have to treat female characters differently. Like, female characters have to be, like, in the same way kind of protected and stuff like that. They can't show like certain things them being like particularly evil or violent or anything like that. And this movie, it just treats them completely equal to the male characters. There's some despicable women in this. There's some women who are victims of like the attacks just like the men are, and it doesn't do it in any gendered or like horrific way. It's just like treating them equally, which for example, big superhero movies so often don't. But this movie does treat women as equals much more than a lot of movies like that, which I thought was kind of refreshing, honestly.
Yeah, weird, right? I mean, I agree with you. It's a strange movie to look at through today's lens, but just taking it at face value, man, and go back to the effects. It's just amazing how everything completely holds up to still after Jesus, man. What is it, like 40 years?
Yeah.
1984. Yeah.
Yeah. 40th anniversary this year.
It is. Look at that.
That is insane.
We planned that.
Yes, exactly. We totally meant to do it.
This is one of those movies I show to people like I showed it to Ryan when people say, you like movies, like, is there a movie I should watch? I say, you start here. And if they come back for another one, then I know, that they're a special kind of cinephile.
Totally. And also one thing I will say, appreciate that you can get on this movie's level. And I was, and like not 100%, but I think that the fact that it's 84 minutes is like the right length for a movie like this. That's just kind of a gritty, down and dirty, like, let's get in, let's get out, let's do our thing. Some movies need to be 3-hour epics, But a movie like this, I don't think it never overstays its welcome. It's just like, hey, here's what you get. Here's a lot of gross stuff. And it also meant that it felt like that they could probably use that small budget more effectively. It's like, okay, we only have so many effect shots. We don't have to like stretch them over the course of the movie. Instead of spending, $20,000 on like 3 different shots because the movie's 3 times longer, we can spend $20,000 on the kid's head exploding.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's stuff that Kaufman writes about in his book. In fact, the car scene when the car goes off the cliff, he actually winds up using that exact same footage in just about all his movies. It's kind of like a running gag. So it'll like cut to this obviously dated footage of this. I think it's like a Plymouth or something falling off a cliff and then exploding. And it's like so obviously not the same car from not the same camera. And he's like, it doesn't care if it's a good shot, like reuse it, like use what you have. You know, it's about resourcefulness.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think Michael Bay took that lesson to heart because you could see that happen in a couple Michael Bay movies. But yeah, no, I think I always kind of like that stuff, you know, like, I mean, it's everyone knows about it now, but you know, in like the early aughts when you'd hear the Wilhelm scream, you'd do the like Leo pointing like meme or whatever, just like, oh, that's the thing I recognize. So that I always love little in jokes like that. There's a million of them in Pixar. And yeah, if it also helps save money too, you're killing two birds with one stone. So I'm absolutely going to have to read this book. So thank you for pointing that one out to me.
Absolutely, man. It's a good read for sure.
So one other thing I wanted to talk about too is I really like the way that the Toxic Avenger himself is kind of revealed, because at first you get Melvin, and it's weird because there's basically like three different people essentially playing Toxic Avenger. You have like Melvin, and then he turns into like the big, you know, monster, and there's obviously a different guy doing that, and then doing the grrrs and the growls and stuff like that. And then when he speaks, somehow he's like, no, I've got this deep, distinguished voice, and he doesn't talk like either Melvin or the guy in the suit. But you're like, at this movie, you're like, yeah, whatever, I could just go with that. I like that they hold off revealing his face for such a long time.
Yeah. I mean, the face is amazing. It's very, for people who haven't seen this, and I think it's a pretty ubiquitous image. Even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably seen an image of the Toxic Avenger on T-shirts and stuff. But he kind of looks like Sloth from the Goonies. Is the quickest shorthand. But dude, you're right. You nailed it. It's that voice. When he comes out with that voice, which also happens in the cafe scene. Holy crap. That's the moment where you're like, you totally know where you stand in this movie. They went for something so ridiculous and that clearly doesn't fit. And you're like, oh, okay. All right. I see what they're doing here. It's great. And yeah, we should also talk about the transformation scene. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's like American Werewolf in London or anything, but it's pretty darn good. I liked it. I mean, it's a pretty decent transformation scene, some good body horror in that scene. Yeah, everything about the reveal of this creature, this hero, was amazing. And dude, like I said, it's so weird that this became a kid's cartoon and they made action figures and stuff. Like, what is it about this property that should, by all accounts, be very not safe for kids, right? Not appropriate for kids, let's say. Somehow it transcends, and he really became like almost like a pop folk hero.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, just like his character does in the movie, is what we've seen happen to, you know, the Toxic Avenger in real life. And I think that kind of speaks to something that was really just going on in the 80s, where it was like you would have these characters that were big and iconic, and kids would love them, even if they weren't necessarily familiar with the source material. Like, I don't think a lot of kids were watching the Toxic Avenger, but I think, like you said, like this guy, he's very ubiquitous. You know about him in the same way. Like, there's also a RoboCop cartoon that was going on in the 80s, and there was toys and stuff like that. And RoboCop, like, no kid should watch that. Like, that movie is like this, like, on steroids, where it's like, that's one of my favorite movies of all time. But like, RoboCop is like shooting people's dicks off and like stuff like that. And you know, but that's a movie that also, like, kids love RoboCop without ever having seen it, and that's something I feel like we don't get a lot of anymore. Where it's just like, you know, these characters that exist that kids know about, and they're like part of the pop culture, and just like anyone can really watch a movie. Like, it's not a kids movie, but you could watch it. I guess that's sort of around with superhero movies now. But actually, ironically enough, a movie that I just saw that made me feel that way was, like, I was watching Godzilla vs. Kong. And I was like, this isn't a kid's movie, but it could be written by a 7-year-old. And, you know, I don't think it was a great movie by any means.
I think it was, actually.
You're right. It did feel that way. But I was having, like, the part of my brain that's just like, a big monkey is punching a big lizard, and they're by the pyramids, and then Mothra showed up. Like, that part of my brain was like, this is awesome. And there's a lot of that there is a lot of awesome shit that happens in this movie that triggers the same part of my brain, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I wish they still made him like this, like Verhoeven and Kaufman used to do, and other guys as well, and gals. You're right. Like Godzilla X King Kong was almost there. It was like the Rampage movie we should have got.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I loved it. And I do love this kind of movie. This big, kind of dumb, but also kind of smart in a very subversive way. You know, like a movie that's kind of antagonistic in a lot of ways. RoboCop was no different, man. That is a great pull. I think this movie shares a lot in common with RoboCop, or RoboCop shares a lot in common with this movie. When did RoboCop come out?
RoboCop, I want to say it was late 80s. It was after this. I want to say 80, like 87 through 89, sometime like that. Let me look it up.
I definitely came to RoboCop first. I didn't get to Toxic Avenger until I was into my teens.
Yeah, 87. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I watched RoboCop as a teen and just kind of like blew my mind. That's like people. There's because of I think what's it called the video game that is like resurging popularity right now. Starship Troopers is having its moments, and people are realizing.
Helldivers.
Thank you. I've got a bunch of friends who are going to be yelling at me right now, but yeah, because of Helldivers having its moment in the sun, I think people are going back and like relooking at Starship Troopers and saying and realizing like, yeah, Verhoeven is this really subversive guy that like on its face, like Starship Troopers is just kind of this movie about like going and fighting aliens, but it's actually a movie about fascism and like,
right.
and propaganda and all this stuff. And in the same way that RoboCop is a movie about, it seems on its surface like he's just a really cool cop guy, and that's what kids will relate to. But really it's about, like police like brutality and just like the crime and all this, all these deep issues, and it's still an awesome movie. And that's what I love when a movie can be like, hey, this is a really cool thing. It's saying something you might not even catch if you watch it when you're 10 or 15. But if you go back and, watch it in your 20s or 30s or whatever, there's a whole nother layer.
Did you see, and I missed it, but spoiler alert, I didn't see the new Cronenberg movie, the one that he did like last year, the year before, where everything's about like surgery. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, Crimes of the Future. I did not see that one.
Okay, so I wonder if that one, if anything today is hitting those same notes. I feel like I would have heard that it had, and I didn't. So I don't feel like I missed anything like that I have to go back and see immediately. But I just miss these films of the 80s and early 90s that were hitting those, sort of, I keep going back to punk because that's what it feels like to me. It's like punk filmmaking, like, and with RoboCop kind of like a cyberpunk, dystopian, misanthropic, untrusting kind of story, I love that. And I miss it.
Yeah, totally. And you got a really good point. Like, this is very punk rock, just in its visuals and aesthetics, and even like the film grain is like, and this is an intentional thing, it's just scratched to shit, like, which
I think that's all they could afford.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and that's something you obviously wouldn't get today because, if you're gonna shoot something on the cheap, you're gonna shoot it digital. So, it was a bug at the time, but I think it's kind of a feature now. But yeah, that down and dirty, like, gross kind of filmmaking is kind of going away. I think if it does exist, there's probably people out there making it, but it's something that is it going to get in front of eyes?
Well, Troma never stopped, right? They still make films to this day. Yeah. And listen, I think that you can easily say that there's a bit of a diminishing return. They've had some good ones throughout the years. There is no doubt about it. But I think their biggest hits are probably behind them. It's kind of like a reunion or legacy act now. Like if you go to a festival and see a band that was amazing back in the day, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I totally get you. You're
I don't
like,
know.
This is cool. They're playing the hits. I get it, but like, it's not exactly like this is. They're probably not as good as when my dad saw them in the 70s.
Right. I guess the point is they're not writing new songs anymore, like so to speak. To stretch that metaphor as far as I can, it's like I really want to hear some new songs in this genre, new films in this genre, and I'm sure I'm missing them. I'm sure they exist. So if somebody out there knows, please hit me up on social or something and let me know what to see. Because I don't think cult movies are alive in this way anymore. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I wonder if they're going to be making a comeback, because it feels like filmmaking cycles kind of go in waves, where like in the 70s it was all the auteur driven stuff. In the 80s you start getting stuff like this. In the 90s it was very actor driven, and then in the 2000s and 2010s it was very franchise driven. And I think maybe there's starting to be some come down from that. And yeah, I don't know. One I just thought of, and it's a movie I don't really like, and it's not as gross as this, but one that like is kind of weird and subversive was Men. Did you ever see Men?
Oh yeah, the one it just like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, Alex Garland's Men. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that
Whoa.
that, like I said,
Wow.
A24 is kind of probably, though, if you're gonna get something like that, it's gonna be from like an A24 or similar type studio. Because I think they're kind of
Maybe Neon.
yeah, Neon. There you go.
Well, yeah. Now I just thought of Titan. Did you see that one?
I did not, but I know exactly what you're talking about. So yeah.
Yeah. And wow, did you see Love Lies Bleeding?
Yes, okay, that's a good pull. That movie fucking ruled.
Yes, I agree, man. We loved it on Cinema Jaw. Totally ate it up. There's a bit of I was a little hard on the ending. I didn't totally love the ending, but as I've sat with it more, it's kind of like a never-ending story ending. Do you remember that movie, The Never-Ending Story?
Dude, it was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I have not watched it since the 90s.
That's fine. But the end where he rides off on Falcor and he puts his fist in the air. It's, yeah. We totally get that kind of ending. And then there's another beat after that. And I've come to like it even more. That movie is also sort of in this vein. Also sort of like Tarantino's early stuff,
Yeah.
A little.
Yeah, a little. And I think Tarantino has lost a step, like not lost a step, but when his editor passed away a couple years back, I felt like that kind of took away from the pace of him having that kind of feeling of these kind of movies. Now they're a lot longer. Loaded. They're a lot more like, all right, we're just kind of being here for the long haul, which is a different vibe, not necessarily a bad vibe, but it doesn't feel like these kind of movies anymore.
No, it feels like he's getting high on his own supply a little bit, but I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Tarantino. I guess I love all his movies to varying degrees, but anyway, we're way off topic.
Yeah. Kill Bill, though, I think Kill Bill has a lot of this movie's DNA in it,
Yeah, it does. Even like we're all over the place, but did you see Gone Girl?
Yeah, I love Gone Girl.
That scene, this is what I had to say about like that scene where it's Rosamund Pike, right?
Yeah.
Okay, she murders Doogie Howser. Why can't Jason Patrick
Neil Patrick Harris?
Neil Patrick Harris.
Yeah.
That murder scene, holy crap! And the score that comes in, the Trent Reznor score that comes in, it's right up there with Psycho, just in terms of like sound and horror. And wow, what a brutal, disgusting scene that was. Yeah, I don't know. I like film that really challenges and sits with you. Don't get me wrong. Like sometimes I just want to watch a Hallmark movie and see something very wholesome and nice.
Both are equally good. You both have their own times and places.
Agreed. But when you're in a mood for one like that, those are some good ones.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's a big thing. It's I talked about how much I love Godzilla vs. Kong, and I think a big part of the reason that movie worked for me so much is because I walked to the theater a block away from WonderCon after the convention, after having a couple drinks and stuff, people do that. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to wind down, sit in this nice heated seat and watch a big dumb movie. And it was perfect. Like I would not have. Yeah, it was exactly what I needed at that moment. If I was watching, something like one of my favorite movies of all time, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it wouldn't have hit as well for me. But that's what I needed in that exact moment. And sometimes, this is, a movie, to bring it back to Toxic Avenger, that I watched late at night by myself, just, after a long day of work, and just this grimy little thing is exactly what the doctor ordered.
Right. I think it retains some of that I shouldn't be watching this quality. Like I'm up past my bedtime and I've snuck downstairs and turned on the cable box. Maybe I'm aging myself here. But you know what I'm talking about? It still holds on to that like forbiddenness. It's cool in that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, it does feel like a movie that your mom would get mad at you watching.
Right. What are you watching? Yeah, totally.
I'm sure after my mom listens to this episode, I'll get a text like, I didn't really like this one. Why did you review it,
Oh, jeez.
But
Derek's mom, it's okay. I promise. I didn't steer Derek wrong.
But yeah, my dad might like it. But to kind of non sequitur here.
Yeah.
I was watching this movie. You know what other movie it really reminded me of?
No.
Well, not really, but like plot wise at least, and character dynamics.
Okay.
It reminded me of City Lights.
Remind me.
So that's the Chaplin movie where Chaplin, he's like a factory worker and he's kind of a low level employee just like this guy is, and then doing manual labor, and he ends up falling in love with the blind girl, and a big part of the movie is devoted to his romance with the blind girl, and she can't see his face and stuff like that, and their whole dynamic just reminded me of this Chaplin movie. Have you ever seen it?
No, so I have not. I'm aware of it through probably the same ways many people are, like the Chaplin movie with RDJ, and just reading a lot about Charlie Chaplin over the years. But I've never actually sat down and watched that. Okay,
and it's also about like under 90 minutes. So in the same way, it's just kind of a story that gets in and out. So for whatever reason, like they're completely different movies. Obviously, like one is like a silent romantic comedy from the 30s, and this is like a grungy 80s schlock-filled movie, but that it still had that same sweetness and that same love, and both characters, with their romance for the blind girl, I feel like both Chaplin and then the Toxic Avenger in this feel kind of like they're not good enough, a little bit unworthy of this love and affection, and they think like, oh well, if this blind girl could see, they wouldn't love me, but neither of them realize that like deep down, that's what their love interest cares about, is their like innate goodness, which, I think that the Toxic Avenger really has, despite this being a grungy movie that we've said is like very punk rock and stuff like that, and he's out there like killing bad, like that's his superpower, is he could just detect evil and then he just goes out and murders it. But I think that there is actually something kind of sweet in a very perverse way about it.
Yes. You just nailed it. It's sweet in a perverse way. This movie totally could have gotten away with some gross exploitative sex scene between the Toxic Avenger and his girlfriend, but they do not play it that way. Their relationship, I mean, while they allude to hanky panky or whatever, they play it very wholesomely. Like their relationship is sweet and kind and loving, and it's built on like mutual trust and respect, and like you almost can feel the chemistry between these two characters.
Yeah, and it's very sweet. She's like, because like he's he's a virgin, and she's very like comforting and like caring and stuff to him, and it feels like, oh, this is a really sweet dynamic between them. The only question I have is, why did they not move into her apartment? Why did they move into his dump? That's the only question I have.
Yeah, I think it's probably best not to ask too many questions. But I guess he was trying to escape, because at one point the character commits this one murder and he's not sure it was the right thing to do. When he kills the old lady in the laundromat, it turns out she was, she had a big long rap sheet, but like he's having this crisis of conscience, and so they decide to move out to the country and live in a tent to keep others safe from his monstrous urges, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Dude. But if you have to sit down and explain this movie, you've definitely done something wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just kind of like, huh. But the one group of people that I feel like this movie is not kind to, because we've said like, oh, like it's, maybe ableist or whatever, but it's like dated, but it's never mean-spirited. The one group of people it is mean-spirited to is people who have like in positions of power, them, like there's the regular people, and then there's the politicians and the cops. You have this fat cat mayor who's just like this corrupt politician, and then of course you have the chief of police who is a literal Nazi.
Yeah, complete with a German accent, the goose stepping, everything. Yeah,
he does the like Sieg Heil like salute and everything. He just keeps slipping back into his like Nazi tendencies. You're like, this movie is real ACAB, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again goes back to the punk rockness of it. It's just like a total mistrust for authority of any kind. And you're right, it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to that kind of stuff. It puts it right out there on Front Street. But then again, on the other side of the equation, there is a local beat cop who is probably also an unfortunate Irish stereotype. But that part aside, he's a hero. He believes in the monster, and he's like an actual part of the community. So I don't think it's unfair in its treatment of authority. I think it's fair. Crazy as that sounds.
No, that's a really good point, because it's not just saying like anyone decides to try and like pursue a job like this is like a terrible person, but it's just like, oh, guess what? Like, these people that have made their way in, it's like, oh, do these people get corrupted by power, or do people who are corrupt naturally go to these positions of power? Either way, it's like the people who end up there, as the chief of police, as the mayor, are these kind of despicable people in a way that, a beat cop or like a just person on the streets, a person going to a diner with their family, they're just normal guys,
Yeah. Interesting observation. I like it.
Yeah. Well, as we're kind of winding down here, do you have any last thoughts or any other thoughts on The Toxic Avenger?
I did. I was thinking, I got distracted by the whole relationship between Toxie and his girlfriend, which that also occurs in the film Mask, the Rocky Dennis story with Cher and Sam Elliott. Although I guess it's not a trope in that case since it's a true story. Although I wonder how much of that is true. I mean, dude, I think we hit the high notes, right? This is a movie that is it's not for everyone, and it's definitely very, very dated. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of value in it. Like, it's definitely worth a spin, and so much of it holds up, and so much of it does not.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. A lot of it holds up, and a lot of it does not. And you got to kind of take the spoonful of sugar, with the medicine,
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Yes, you do. But I'm glad it exists. I'm glad a studio like Troma exists, and so many amazing talents have gone through there. And it's people need a place to start out. And there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I'll wrap it up with just a question. Then, we talked about how this is like a good jumping off point. Do you have any like other favorite like real indie movies that you wanted to shout out to the audience?
Oh, wow, dude. Holy crap. I was not prepared for that question.
Sorry, I just kind of sprung it on you there.
So define really indie. Are you talking like underground film?
However you want to take it. I'll leave it up to you.
Wow, that's such a great question. I mean, too many to name. Like the genres that I like, and again, I said I'm very into like just wholesome movies a lot of the time, but like horror and sci-fi and stuff like that, you can find some of the most creative people working because the barrier to entry into those genres is much lower. So no, I guess being so unprepared for that question, I don't have one specifically, but I would say there's two things I would ask people to do. If you live in a bigger city or a smaller town, look to the bigger market that you're closest to and find your local underground film festival. Like here in Chicago, we have a great one, the Underground. You should talk to the guy that runs it, Brian Wendorf. He's amazing. Find your underground film festival or just your local film festival and support people that aren't making studio films. And don't get me wrong, I love studio films, love with a capital L. But I just don't think those people, we don't get those people unless there's a AAA system, so to speak. Like you got to have this, the underground needs to be healthy to create tomorrow's mainstream. So get out there, support it, or you know what, go to a place like Shudder or a lesser known streaming service if that's the best you can do, and seek out some of these really small horror and genre movies, and just see what's out there.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. In addition to Shudder, I would say also a great resource for independent film is Tubi. Like
Tubi's
honestly,
awesome.
Get on Tubi because they've just got all the schlock. They've got stuff you've never even fucking heard of.
They sure do. This is where I watched Toxic Avenger on Tubi. So perfect.
Yeah.
What did you watch it on? Out of curiosity,
I think I did also watch it on Tubi. Yeah,
it's also on Prime, so there's really no excuse to not watch it.
Yeah, or I might have watched it on Hoopla. Hoopla is also a great resource. Hoopla, if you've
amazing.
got Hoopla or Canopy, depending on which library card you have, there's a lot of really great. There's like old indie stuff. There's new big stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that just got nominated for Best Picture that's on Hoopla. Yeah. Check all of that out for sure, I would say. And then to just launch off something you were saying, I know I've been talking about like WonderCon, but a lot. But one of the coolest things I got to do there was they had a panel on directors on directing, put on by like Collider, and they had the directors of Abigail, they had David Leitch, and they had Wes Ball, and they're all there promoting their own movies. And it was really, you talking about like AAA system. It was so interesting to see, them talk to each other and also kind of talk about the way that they all came up, because you had Wes Ball, who, I'm a really big fan of his. I think we covered his Maze Runner movies on this podcast. I'm excited for his Apes film. And of course, he's going to be doing the next Zelda movie. He kind of had a more traditional, like working in the movies, like working his way up from different jobs all the way to director. Then you have David Leitch, who obviously he starts as a stunt double. Before Deadpool 2, he had John Wick.
Right.
And then, now he's directing The Fall Guy. And he even talked about, like, somebody asked him a question because he brought up doing a stunt in some movie where he was doubling Brad Pitt. And it's like, oh, yeah, he would eventually, this guy he was doubling, end up directing him in Bullet Train. So he came up through, like, a stunt performer. But then you had the directing team of Abigail, and they started on YouTube. And so I think that's another thing too. That's another resource. It's like these guys. We didn't
even talk about YouTube, yeah.
Right, exactly. That's a thing. It's like, especially with this genre with horror people, that's one thing that's another avenue that did not exist in the 80s. Like they would have had to go to Troma or something like that. But now you can like make movies on YouTube. Like, last year, those Australian guys did with Talk to Me. They were guys who made all these horror movies on YouTube. And the same way these guys came up making all these movies, now they're making Abigail. And it's like, so...
Did you see Abigail yet?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, me neither.
But yeah, I did see a scene from it, which looked rad as shit at WonderCon.
Yeah, it does. It looks like fun.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to see that. So I think that just proves with the three of those directors that there are different ways into directing and into being a filmmaker. And especially today in the modern age. And I think that because of movies like this, that's why those exist.
Yeah, right. It's nice to see that AAA system, for lack of a better term, is still alive and healthy. It's good. Good to hear.
But yeah, Matt, what did you want to, before we go, what did you want to let the people know about Cinema Jaw? Where can they hear it?
You can find Cinema Jaw anywhere you listen to podcasts, except for TuneIn for some reason. I just found out that we're not on TuneIn, but I'm working on that. But anywhere else, like Spotify, Apple, I don't know what Google is using anymore, but anywhere you find podcasts, we're there. Or you can just go to cinemajaw.com. And we are at CinemaJaw on all the social medias, including YouTube, where we post every episode. So you can hear us there as well.
Very, very nice. And yeah, anybody out there, if this is the first time you're listening, if you're a fan of Matt's and you decided to come over here to give it a listen, I'd love for you to stick around, listen to some more episodes. We've got a whole big back catalog. If you want to subscribe, get some more stuff, if this is the first time you're listening, give us 5 stars. That really helps the show get noticed a lot. And I do some other stuff as well. You can also check me out on my other show, which airs on opposite Mondays to this one, where I'm the co-host. It's called Midnight Film Society. Me and my buddy Damien do. And then also, if you really like my stuff, there's a Patreon for Underrated. It's patreon.com/underrated movie podcast called Underrated Disc 2. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's all kinds of bonus podcasts and extras that are available for patrons. If you want to just support for free, give us that 5 stars. That is awesome too. But yeah, that about does it. One more time, Matt, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a blast, dude. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Lots of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time. And next week, I'm going to be starting a bit of a mini-series for underrated movies with extended or alternate cuts. So director's cuts, assembly cuts, that might give you a clue of one of the movies we're covering. So they're going to be doing that for the next 2 months. So tune back in. First one we're going to be covering is Dr. Sleep. Alan coming back. The old co-host Alan's coming back to guest co-host once more and talk about the director's cut of Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep. Till then, I'll see you guys all later.